Here's the bottom line for me on this. We need we don't need the government to set, the federal government to set national standards, but we got to expect our children to reach a certain standard, and it ought to be uniform, okay? So my understanding is the governors got together with state superintendents and principals, and they came up with this. We're not doing well in the world. I mean, if we're not careful, the Googles and the PayPals are going to be invented somewhere else. I mean, it was interesting to see the Germans land in a spaceship over on the Comet. I mean, I was like that, but wow, why wasn't that here? So I do think we have to have good standards. In our state, we are saying that the curriculum that gets proposed by local school districts. There's parental advisors on this. And to me, I don't see that there's somehow that this is, Obama core or some other kind of thing that I hear. I have looked at it carefully. My concern is with the PARCC test. Is that test a good test? We've delayed the impact of that test for a year. If it's a goofy test, we'll throw it out. But the idea that kids in Iowa and kids in California and kids in Ohio ought to be at a higher level of achievement, I'm completely for that. I think it makes sense. Now, if the federal government starts meddling in this, if you start doing all this education policy out of Washington, I'm not for that. But as long as local school boards and parents are involved in running the curriculum to reach a higher standard, particularly in math and in science, which we have in Ohio. We're not going to do history with it, some Common Core. I think it makes a lot of sense. And we're going to watch it, and we're going to watch the PARCC test.
Yeah, I was for it when, as it was described, as John described it, when it was a bottom-up approach. What I object to is Arnie Duncan and the Federal Department of Education making curriculum decisions. And testing does drive what gets taught. Look, in Louisiana, we had something called LEAP. Even before there was Common Core, we had high-stakes testing. We had standardized tests, and we were able to judge our students against NEET. So we can compare how our students are doing against kids in Ohio and Wisconsin on math and science and other subjects. So we could do that before there was Common Core. My concern about Common Core is it's become something it was never intended to be. Two fundamental concerns. One, that it's become a one-size-fits-all federal approach. Certainly agree with the concerns of PARCC, but I agree, not just PARCC, smart balance, the whole thing. I think that it does drive curriculum decisions, and I don't think the federal government should be doing this. I think states and local teachers and parents should be able to do this. There was no transparency in the development of this, and even folks that started off supporting and said, wait a minute, why didn't we have open comments? Why didn't we invite other experts?
First off, I want high standards. I want them set at the local and state level, which is why I oppose Common Core. We're changing that. We've changed that and the process of changing even more in the state of Wisconsin. Because I want high standards, though, if you don't have a national standard. I'm just curious. Well, our ACT scores have gone up since I've been governor. They're second best in the country, so we do have high standards. My graduation rates have gone up 4 years in a row. My third grade reading scores have gone up. All those things have gone up. I would say that the reason why we have schools in many parts of our states and many parts of this country that are failing is not because we don't have a high national standard. It's because we don't hold our schools accountable for what they're teaching today. And I would argue, no surprise from Wisconsin, one of the biggest reasons was because with collective bargaining in our public employee unions, in our schools, we treat good teachers and poor teachers exactly the same. One of the biggest reasons why our test scores have gone up was because 3.5 years ago, we unleashed that burden on our schools. We didn't just go after collective bargaining to deal with pensions and health care. We allowed our schools to be run by our school boards so that local officials could be held accountable by local parents, taxpayers, and others. They're the ones actually running the schools now. And I think if you look around the country, particularly in our larger urban areas, one of the biggest problems is we have schools filled with many great teachers, but we also have those rubber rooms in a lot of our schools where teachers go who don't belong in teaching anymore, but under the old collective bargaining contracts that most of our states and most of our cities have around the country, they're stuck there. There's no way. We can now hire and fire based on merit. We can pay based on performance. We can put the best and the brightest in our classroom. That's what we need more than a national standard.
Well, in my first year in Congress, even though it was President Bush's top priority at the time, I was part of a group that actually opposed No Child Left Behind because I believe then and believe now that education is a state and local function. You asked the question, what would I ask from? I would say resources, not red tape. If you want to block grant education resources to allow the state of Indiana, the state's represented here, to craft new solutions, innovation. In Indiana, we're committed to making career and vocational education a priority in every high school again. If the federal government wants to free up resources for us to do that, more power to But when I became governor, our legislature took a hard look at Common Core. Indiana had adopted it. And they sent me a bill, and we became the first state to legally withdraw from Common Core and from PARC. And we went through the arduous process of writing our own standards. I really do believe the principle of who decides here is extremely important. Government that governs least governs best. And those things that are most important to us, which I would put education, I would put public safety, the health and welfare of our people, ought to be managed, ought to be governed, ought to be accountable at the closest level to the people. And I think that Republicans do well to assert that principle.
I see no reason to reauthorize No Child Left Behind. We didn't participate with Race to the Top or against Common Core because, just like Mike Pence and the other governors on the stage, we agree that the governors and the legislatures in this country know better how to educate their children than a bureaucracy in Washington, D.C. So, the idea that Washington knows best in a host of different areas, whether it's healthcare, whether it's education, whether it's transportation infrastructure, all of those need to have a good conversation about what is the most efficient way. It was Louis Brandeis, a liberal Supreme Court justice, that said that the states are the laboratories of democracy. And if you want to put programs into place, do it at the state level, and if they foul it up, they've only fouled up their state, not the entire country. And I would suggest to you that's a good message for Washington, D.C. Reevaluate.
Go ahead.
I got to, because I have a little bit of a different message here. Common Core, my understanding is it was the governors
45 governors.
that were very concerned about the fact that we were not testing as well as students around the world in other countries, okay? And it was the governors who called state superintendents of education and principals to set a standard so that our children would have to leap higher, and there wasn't going to be one student in one part of the country who could not do as well as somebody else. This was nothing to do, from what I understand, I wasn't a governor at the time, but these 45 governors through the National Governors Association said we need to have some standards. Now in my state, you got choice and teacher evaluations, and our third grade reading at 96% of our kids doing well. I mean, all these things you're talking about. But in my state, now maybe this is different than in other states, but in my state, it is local school boards that develop the curriculum to meet the standards. There's nobody from Washington or in Columbus telling a local school district what the curriculum ought to be. It's purely local control. Now, I just, this is what I looked at. Now, if there's information out there that somehow somebody else is setting the curriculum, I'd like to know about it, because I don't have any complaints from anybody in my state that they're not able to set their own curriculum to meet a higher standard. My problem with PARC is back to what Bobby was saying about, and maybe that test ought to go out, but higher standards for every kid in America, with a process where local school districts set the curriculum to meet the higher standard. We have SATs and ACTs to measure people. That's a national test. So what I'm saying to you is, maybe I didn't get the message from the governors, the 45 governors that came out with this, but they didn't have Arnie Duncan. They didn't have these people writing this. This was governors doing it, and that's what I thought we wanted. So, but I'm going to look at what these guys say, and if I have to go back and change, I'll be open enough to say, well, there's something I missed here.